This jet is legendary for being the fastest manned aircraft ever made, and in model scale it can scoot around too, but against our metrics, it comes up a little short. Hey there, I'm John, this is Two Brothers RC, and this is the Freewing SR-71 Blackbird twin 70mm. You guys have been waiting for this for weeks now. It's absolutely gorgeous, very true to scale, but it's got some quirks that you'll want to watch out for. If you're not careful, your first flight might be your last. Now, you can say that about anything, really, but nothing stalls like this jet does. Wait and see. Today's Blackbird review is brought to you by our channel sponsor, and no, it's not some bullshit company, it's you, the Two Brothers community. You guys are awesome. Shoutouts are coming toward the end of the vid. We couldn't have made this one without you with how expensive this jet is, but for now, let's focus on sticking to the facts. And with that, we'll start with discussing the Blackbird's agility and maneuverability. Our first agility checkpoint looks for whether the jet is prone to accelerated stalls. These are caused by pilot input exceeding the aircraft's critical angle of attack, or in the case of the Blackbird, basically trying to do anything but fly in circles. I'm being a little hyperbolic here, but not too much. If you maneuver too aggressively, and it's not hard to do, you will stall this jet, and when you stall the jet...
Yeah, that was a little long.
You can expect some pretty hellish stall behavior if you're not flying at the center of gravity marks. But flying at the CG marks comes with its own issues, like reduced pitch authority and up trim on the elevons, which causes drag and reduces flight time. So it's a pick your poison kind of airplane. Either you fly behind the marks to get longer flight times and better maneuverability while risking some pretty gnarly stalls, or you fly at or in front of the CG marks and get reduced flight time with a lot of up trim required to fly level, while being more resistant to stalls, and they're easier to get out of if you happen to get into them at all. The Blackbird has a rather unique stall in that it tends to enter into a flat spin at the CG point that I flew it on. This makes the jet almost tail heavy, and it tries to pitch up on its own if you throttle up while you're in the stall. The only thing you can do to get out of a spin with this jet is a quick burst of full thrust while simultaneously pushing the nose down as hard as you can. The forward momentum from the power application causes the jet to move forward in the air momentarily as it attempts to nose up on its own, and pushing the nose down while you're doing this will cause the jet to break out of the stall and recover once enough air flows over the elevons. Keep the nose pointed down and throttle up smoothly. Otherwise, you will flat spin to your doom. This is not a beginner or intermediate airplane. This is very much an expert level jet, and you will crash it if you're not familiar with stall recovery techniques. The Blackbird fails this checkpoint, but it's the price you gotta pay if you want to fly something like this. It's really easy to make less nose heavy. No mods are required to get it to fly 25mm behind the marks, which is what I prefer. You can fly it nose heavy, you can get it balanced neutrally, and you can fly it slightly tail heavy like I prefer, all by placing a battery either in the rear or the front compartment. If you want it to be nose heavier, put the battery up front. If you want it more responsive and less draggy, use the rear compartment and place it as far forward as you can. It does take off and land without struggling. It has enough thrust to get up and go, but like with a lot of the scoring in this review, it's gonna depend on how you set it up. If you flew it 25mm behind the marks, it takes off very fast. If you fly it at the CG marks, it takes more runway to rotate. If you load two large batteries into it, like a pair of SNC 5800 packs, well, it's gonna take up most of the runway to rotate because the center of gravity is in front of the marks and the wing load requires that the jet is rolling really fast in order to have the rotation speed necessary to not stall and crash on takeoff. So if you're flying it where I did on a single 5900 SMC pack, yeah, it takes off and it lands without struggling. In fact, it performed best overall on a single 5900 for me. It was light, it didn't need up trim on the elevons, and it floated in for landings with a consistent nose-up attitude with the help of the AS3X Plus gyro. Yes, I did remove the stock gyro because I can personally guarantee you that the setup I'll give you later will outfly the stock gyro any day of the week. With regard to landing, it handled well most of the time, but again, it's all dependent on what battery you use, how much wing load you add to those stubby wings, and what your center of gravity balance point is. I found that the jet landed best 25mm behind the marks, again on SMC 5900 HV packs. With the parachute, which is absolutely effective and required on my 300-foot runway, the jet stops within 150 feet. However, this changes if you run a nose-heavier center of gravity. It takes a little longer to stop because you can't flare as much or as long because of the balance point not being aggressive. And all bets are off if you go with a large pair of batteries because you add so much additional wing load to the jet, you essentially have to come in really fast in order to land without stalling. This touchdown was at the beginning of our 300-foot runway, and it would have rolled off to the end had I not turned at the last moment. The drogue chute is super effective, and you will need to use it and also pack it properly. I'll cover that technique now. Basically, all there is to it is wrapping the chute tightly with the green paracord lines and loosely pack the orange shock cord on top of the chute as you push it in. Be careful putting it in. The plastic door does not feel great as it tries biting into your skin as you close the assembly up. If you don't pack it this way, it's not going to open up most of the time, so just keep that in mind. Complicating things even more, it's literally all black, so that makes it hard to see as it gets below the tree line at certain times of day. I just turned 41. Go me! I still have perfect vision, and I still can't see the damn thing when it passes the tree line for the life of me. I just have to hope that I can spot the landing light, which isn't as bright as I hoped it would be, and remember where it was when it went below the tree line, and then hope for the best until it gets closer. You really have to be good with object permanence while landing this jet, because if you can't remember what direction it was oriented when it's on the approach as it goes below the tree line, you're gonna crash. It's just hard to see. The camera picks it out better than the human eye does, but it's damn near impossible to see even with perfect vision, and you need to always remember how it was oriented to keep it from wrecking. The landing light could definitely be brighter to assist here, otherwise the jet handles like most other Delta jets. You bring it in with low throttle with a moderate angle of attack, meaning that you hold the nose up a little on approach while you feed in power to keep it flying in a smooth curve to the ground. Touch down on the mains and you're good to go. It's even wheelie capable if you've got the stick skill. I have heard some pilots suffering from wing rock. With regard to that, I think it's mostly an issue of the stock gyro not having the effectiveness needed to keep the plane stable throughout the flight envelope. Fixed gains are barely useful outside of the speed they were tuned for. If your gains are fixed and you've tuned them so that the jet doesn't wobble at, say, 100 miles an hour, those gains are minimal and will have very little to no effect at lower airspeeds. Think of it like driving your vehicle on a highway. At high speeds, you barely move the wheel to keep the vehicle lined up within the lane you're traveling in. The same goes for airplanes. The faster they go, the less control input, either from the pilot, the flight computer, or the gyro, is necessary to maintain a given altitude and attitude. This is why I don't fly anything but AS3X Plus. I tune my gains to be effective at high, moderate, and low airspeeds, and my gains can be adjusted up or down as needed to compensate for higher winds or more stability required in, say, a high alpha pass. Trying to tune this jet like this with fixed gains is honestly asinine and will lead to useless gains at either the high speed range or the low speed range. Either way, it's not optimal. You can skip ahead to the gyro gains chapter if you'd like to see exactly what I'm talking about here with a proper throttle-based gain setup. If you expected this jet to live up to its namesake and fly super fast, well, how can I describe this? I'd say it's like buying an E-flite V1200, which goes 180 miles an hour, but getting closer to the top speed of a timber at about 80 miles an hour. It's probably exactly around 105, but really, it's just numbers, and I don't care for chasing numbers on a GPS device. What I do care about is thrust, and this jet really doesn't have the thrust-to-weight ratio that its namesake does. In fact, it kind of feels underpowered to me, and flight time suffers quite a bit for it. The Blackbird is kind of disappointing if you're the kind of person who loves to brag about GPS speed. Not having a fast SR-71 kinda seems to entirely miss the point of an SR-71. It certainly looks good, but it doesn't fly like a Blackbird, more like a Blackbird-shaped object that just happens to fly a little faster than a timber does. I'd be lying if I said I wasn't disappointed in this regard. But the metric that we're using here isn't, is John happy with the amount of thrust available? It's, does it have adequate thrust for most maneuvers? Which it does, so it passes this checkpoint. For our final checkpoint, the Blackbird fails the easy stall recovery metric because it requires that you actually have a good understanding of full-scale stall recovery procedures, something that's useful to know but really shouldn't be required in model aviation in my opinion. Yet, here we are. Before I announce the score, which is super obvious if you just look at the passes versus fails on the left, look at the on-screen timer for how long it took to get out of this stall. That's some nasty freefall. The Blackbird earns a 3 out of 5 here.
That one scared me.
Moving on to flight time, after spending nearly 12 minutes in the agility chapter, this jet continues to be a mixed bag. I'm going to score the Blackbird based on flying it on the optimal setup for me, which was a single SMC 5900 HV battery shoved as far forward as possible in the aft compartment. I also tested out two other configurations, a 5900 HV placed in the middle of the front compartment to balance at the CG point, and a pair of 5800 HVs placed as far aft as possible in each compartment, which balanced about 20 millimeters ahead of the marks. But I will only score the jet based on the 5900 pack, which is what I did the overwhelming amount of flying with. On average, I got 3 minutes and 30 seconds of flight time almost every single time I flew on this configuration. I had to use significant down aileron trim, which kept the jet cleaned up and flying with minimal drag, yet it still didn't want to fly very long. The airframe itself seems to suffer from a lot of drag. This would explain why the top speed is just above that of a timber going full throttle. Flight time was reduced for me even more flying on the CG marks on a single 5900, giving me about 3 minutes, but it increased substantially on the dual 5800 packs, giving me nearly 7 minutes of flight, doing nothing but flying in lazy circles at half throttle. I could also get about 5 minutes of flight on a single 5900 behind the marks flying high alpha, but that's not really what anyone bought this jet to do, except me. So the Blackbird earns a 3 out of 5 here. Moving into our landing gear section, this is not a grass-capable jet. I repeat, do not buy this jet thinking it's grass-capable, because it's not. The Blackbird does come with functional wheels, passing our first checkpoint looking for functional wheels. They're true to scale too. Quite nice looking, but they suffer from the typical RC airplane issue of being completely hard and stiff. I've been clowned on by other channels for talking about this problem for a while now, and yeah, if you don't care about your airframe's longevity because you have more money than sense, then sure, have a laugh at my expense. You have my permission. Doesn't really bother me. What does bother me is watching this jet deform on landing because the wheels are so stiff that they provide literally nowhere for the shock of a harder landing to go. Doesn't even have to be a hard landing, it could be anything more than just kissing the ground. Look at what I mean on screen. Usually I land better than this, but I'm not perfect, and nobody else is either. So, to help with our less than perfect landings, the wheels should be deforming instead of the jet. That's why I check for hard wheels. While yes, it's true that any significantly hard impact will cause deformation of an airplane, especially if it's made out of foam, the first thing that should be deforming is the wheel set, not the fuselage. Land like this enough times, and I guarantee you the airframe is going to wear out prematurely because Freewing cheaped out on wheel material and didn't use something that can absorb shock. The Blackbird fails the hard wheel checkpoint. Now, the gear is attached to a suspension. You can see it in action while I push the jet on the ground, and you can see it bottoming out on landing here and bouncing back up again. This is, again, why soft tires make a huge difference. They absorb impact. They don't just redirect that energy somewhere else in the plane. The gear required low maintenance from what I could see, passing again, and the gear worked flawlessly with no issues that I was able to spot, earning the Blackbird a 4 out of 5. This hard wheel issue is so prevalent in this hobby, and I'm personally just a bit fed up with it. When you pay $730, yes, that's how much this jet cost, the design of the jet should not lend itself towards self-destruction over time. If Horizon can use softer wheels that deform when you land hard, Freewing certainly can too. Get with it, guys. Oh, and before we wrap this section up, here's a montage of every time the drogue chute failed to deploy. Follow the wrapping guide I mentioned earlier if you want to avoid this.
Yeah.
Onward to fit and finish, this is a mixed bag, even if the scoring ends up being higher than you think. I've flown the Blackbird 16 times over the course of 2 days to shoot this video, and the paint is already degrading, yet it looked fine out of the box. So, based on our current system, I do have to give it a pass here. It was good when I took it out of the box, but the system doesn't account for longevity, however short that period of time might end up being. First, the mold release dots, the star pattern that you see all over the jet, all seem to lose paint, so you get white dots all over the airplane. I know I'll get some hate in the comments for pointing this out because some people don't care, but I think it's a legitimate gripe. If you're going to paint a plane, the paint should stick to the damn plane, not flake off over the course of 16 flights. The last thing I want from my Freewing jets is to start emulating the worst part of owning a flex plane, which is picking up the shed flakes of paint all over the house, like my Husky's white fur that somehow finds its way into every part of my house and my clothing. You can fix the paint issue by using a drop of Tamiya black panel liner wherever you find white spots forming, but again, for the price, this really shouldn't be an issue at all. Yet it's still gonna pass here because, again, it wasn't a problem out of the box. The much vaunted plastic edging on the fuselage doesn't extend to the wings. So the part where you actually grab the plane has zero plastic reinforcement, which causes premature wear on the edges of the wing, both in the paint and in the foam. And of course, the battery hatches have no plastic reinforcement either, yet the area around them on the fuselage does. You can't explain that unless you realize that the explanation is that they cut corners on a really expensive jet. Not cool. The hatches are the most used part of the plane, and they should have plastic edging to match the plastic edging on the fuselage. Though I suppose you could cover the edges of the battery hatches with black electrical tape to prevent them from showing wear, which, in my opinion, Freewing could have just done at the factory while charging us, again, $730. If you're gonna do plastic edging, do it to the entire leading edge of the wings and the hatch edges. Otherwise, all you're doing is shifting the wear issue to another part of the plane. Anyhow, that's a lot of words to say that the Blackbird passes the first checkpoint looking for blotchy or damaged paint out of the box. Your airspeed may vary. I personally recommend being gentle picking this thing up because it will wear on the foam and on the paint quickly. The foam did look exceptional, but that's nothing new for Freewing. This is one area that they consistently get right, passing the foam isn't bubbly or weird looking out of the box checkpoint. Now, if you leave this black jet in the sun, I guarantee it's gonna bubble up and look like ass, so don't do it. Put it in the shade or get ready for your Blackbird to be a gator bird. The Blackbird features full flying vertical stabilizers. I actually don't know if there's any weird aviation portmanteau like stabilator or flaperon to describe these control surfaces. Maybe you'd call them a rudder riser or a stable udder. I actually kind of like stable udder, so I think that's what I'll call them, stable udders. The stable udders actually have less effectiveness than you think. I couldn't get the jet to do anything too crazy by deflecting them fully. The elevons are all gapless hinged, which is great, and typical for a Freewing jet in this size class. The Blackbird passes the plastic or gapless hinges checkpoint. Looking at the decals, we see that they're a mix. They're stickers and they're water slide decals that you put on yourself. I occasionally get clowned on for talking about stickers versus decals, so let me clear up exactly what I consider a sticker. Basically anything that's paper with an adhesive backing that's thick enough to actually be visibly protruding from the skin of the aircraft. A decal is super thin and made of plastic or some other similar material and barely has any thickness to it, while a sticker is generally made of paper. It's also usually thick and it tends to peel up over time. So the red lines all over the Blackbird are what appear to be paper stickers, while the jet uses water slide decals on the rest of the airframe. Since the overwhelming majority of the jet uses decals, I'm going to go with it passing this checkpoint too, and the decals do stick quite well, although the red lines do seem to poke up a little more than I was hoping they would, again because they're stickers. Either way, the jet passes this section with a 5 out of 5. Our final section is Avionics and Lighting. Going point by point again, since this video is getting super long, the Blackbird comes with metal servos, which passes our first checkpoint. They're loud and not terribly precise, but they work well enough. If you were to upgrade them to high-tech D85MG servos linked below, I suspect you would see a significant improvement in how the jet handles in the air with AS3X+. I didn't see any issues with the ESCs overheating. They appear to be built well enough to take on the task of hauling this thing around the sky, passing again. It does contain a lighting system, but it's pretty basic, with a couple of blinking lights and a relatively weak landing light. From what I can tell, this is correct. The full-scale Blackbird didn't have any wingtip navigation lights either, passing our third and fourth checkpoints. The battery tray is one of the best that I've seen in a model aircraft, with plenty of space to get the center of gravity exactly where you want it to be. The Blackbird earns a 5 out of 5 in this section. It's just odd that we got the ability to make this jet tail heavy when you need an understanding of how to properly configure a gyro for a plane like this in order to take advantage of it. Don't worry, that info is coming up right after the final scoring, which is a 20 out of 25. Pretty good, but could have been a lot better if we had gotten softer tires that would actually take impacts instead of making the plane turn into a pool noodle on landings where you didn't kiss the ground. The other agility drawbacks are just intrinsic to the design of an SR-71. Even the E-flite SR-71 Twin 40 entered into unrecoverable stalls, and it did crazy Cobra maneuvers like this one does too, so that's cool, I guess. At least I think it is. I will say that I'm happy to see companies like this taking on designs that you don't really see very often. Let's continue this trend and see some really rare stuff, like the YF-23, F-16XL, F-15 Active, Su-47, Su-37, etc. There's a whole world of prototype jets out there, and guess what? I'll be printing one of them pretty soon. Let's dive right into the setup for the gain system now. I'm flying this jet on an AR-8360T receiver from Spectrum. This has enough channels to give you a trimmable nose wheel, full control over the elevons, the parachute drogue system, and all you gotta do for the physical setup is pull the gyro out and run the servo leads from the mixing board direct into the receiver itself on an Elevon A wing type. Additionally, for the upcoming gains to work correctly, you need to do a few things. First, go into servo setup and set all of your servo travel to 150 positive and 150 negative. I flew on 100% rate all the time with 50% expo on all channels. You might want more expo or you might want less expo than I use. It's personal preference. Find out what works for you. Only you can determine what feels right when flying your jet. Next, you need a curved mix, which will cause the throttle system to control the gain channel. To learn how to do this, follow the AS3X Plus guide linked below in the description. Copy these points that you see on screen and only adjust the throttle position with throttle cut enabled. The lowest throttle setting should be 0%, the midpoint should be -20%, and the high stick point should be -50%. Next, once you've done this, go into forward programming and enter the Capture Gyro Gains menu under Gyro Settings, AS3X Plus Settings, Capture Gyro Gains in Forward Programming. As you adjust the throttle position, assuming you followed the AS3X Plus guide linked below, you'll see the gains reducing based on your current throttle position. This is the key to avoiding oscillation in the air. Before I cover the aerodynamic explanation for why this works, let's get to more flying footage while I overlay the gyro settings on screen. You can see them right now. Copy these values. They have been tested on the stock equipment in the mix demonstrated here, and they work quite well in most wind conditions. Though, if high winds happen to be forecast for a given flying day, you might want to set the center point of your gain slider or your knob down a little so it won't oscillate. Now, let's go ahead and get into the theory of why throttle-based gains are superior to fixed gains. To demonstrate this, I'm going to use the F16XL that I printed using a model file from Kyle at BuiltFast RC, so you can see how the control surfaces react in real time to throttle position. Throttle-based gains work on the assumption that your current throttle stick position roughly correlates to the airspeed that your jet is flying at. So, a lower throttle stick position correlates to a higher control surface response. The slower an airplane goes, the more control throw is required on any control surface to adjust its trajectory in the air. This is why I've always pushed back against people recommending high rates at absurdly low values, like 10mm up and 10mm down. That only gives you useful control at higher speeds, and is basically useless at low speed. As the throttle position goes up, the gyro will use less corrections for deviation from the jet's flight path. At full throttle, the controls are minute and do the job of keeping the jet stable without causing it to oscillate in any axis. Care must be taken to throttle back smoothly while using this setup. If you throttle back instantly after going full speed, you will probably oscillate in the roll axis. It's not a huge problem normally, it just looks really stupid. Hopefully this info helps. If you have any additional questions, hop onto our Discord server via discord.gg/2brosrc and ask for assistance in the Tech and Setup channel. We're usually around and we'll help if we can. Thanks again to our channel members who made this video possible, especially our mega fans, Sarasota RC Squadron, Michael Smith, JR Man, and Todd, along with a very special thanks to our two ultra fans, Seahawk92 and TBRC Fan. Consider being a channel member on 2brosrc.com/supporters. Your membership funds go directly towards funding airplanes like this, which companies will not send out to review. I'm happy to fly unsponsored airplanes, I just don't want to go broke doing it. Without all the support of you guys, this channel would be a lot harder to work on. Your support means the world to Liz and I. It's great making content that you guys love to watch. Thanks again, we'll see you guys next week with a look at the Hobby King Twin Otter from Avios. It's a neat little bird with a couple of surprises.